Welcome to Silent Revenge, where betrayal doesn't end a story, it starts one. Some betrayals scream, others whisper quietly, until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. What happened to me started on a cold Thanksgiving morning, the kind where families gather, tables overflow with food, and everyone pretends life is perfect. But that year, my son told me not to come. And hours later, I found him tied up in a shed behind his own house. Thanksgiving had always been our tradition. Every year, my son Caleb hosted. Ever since his mother passed away 5 years ago, the holiday meant even more to us. It was the one day where grief softened and family still felt whole. So when I called him that morning, smiling as I packed the pumpkin pie he loved, I expected the usual. Instead, his voice sounded tight. "Dad, don't come today." I frowned. "What do you mean don't come? I'm already getting ready." "I'm busy," he said quickly. "Work stuff. Just stay home this year. Busy." On Thanksgiving. "Caleb, that doesn't make any sense." There was a pause. Too long. Then another voice whispered faintly in the background. A woman's voice. Before I could ask, Caleb spoke again. "Please, Dad, just give me space today." The line went dead. I stared at my phone. Something wasn't right. My son never spoke to me like that. Never, especially not on Thanksgiving. For the next hour I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe work problems. Maybe stress. Maybe his girlfriend Melissa was hosting something different. But the feeling wouldn't leave. That heavy pressure in my chest. By mid-afternoon, the house felt unbearable. So I did the one thing Caleb asked me not to do. I drove to his place anyway. The neighborhood looked quiet when I arrived. Too quiet for a holiday. No cars in the driveway except Melissa's white SUV. No laughter. No music. Just silence. I walked around the side of the house toward the backyard. That's when I heard something. A dull thumping sound, like someone kicking wood. It was coming from the old storage shed behind the garage. At first I thought it was an animal, but then I heard it again. 3 sharp knocks, and a muffled voice, "Dad." My blood turned cold. I ran to the shed door and yanked it open. Inside, tied to a chair with rope around his wrists and mouth taped shut, was my son. Caleb's eyes were wide with panic. And the first thought that hit me wasn't fear. It was something worse. Because the only other person who should have been there that day was Melissa. And suddenly I realized something that made my stomach twist. This wasn't random. This was planned. And Thanksgiving dinner was just the beginning. Sometimes the people who smile at your table are the same ones sharpening the knife behind your back. The moment I ripped the tape off Caleb's mouth, he sucked in a desperate breath like a man who had been underwater too long. "Dad, thank God," he gasped. My hands shook as I started untying the rope around his wrists. "Who did this to you?" I demanded. But deep down I already feared the answer. Caleb swallowed hard, rubbing the red marks on his wrists. His eyes darted toward the house like he expected someone to appear any second. "Melissa," he whispered. The word landed like a hammer in my chest. "Melissa," I repeated, stunned. "Your girlfriend Melissa." He nodded slowly. She and her brother planned it. For a moment I couldn't process what he was saying. Melissa had been part of our lives for almost 3 years. She came to family dinners. She helped organize Caleb's birthday parties. She even sat beside me at my wife's memorial service. She cried with us, or at least she pretended to. "Why would she do this?" I asked. Caleb looked ashamed, because the answer wasn't simple. "It started with the business," he said quietly. 6 months earlier, Caleb had launched a small construction consulting company. I'd helped him with the startup money, nearly my entire retirement savings. Melissa had insisted on helping manage the finances. At the time, Caleb thought it was a blessing. Now he realized it was something else. "She's been draining the company accounts," Caleb said, his voice bitter. "Moving money into shell companies. I confronted her 2 days ago." My stomach tightened. "And she panicked," he replied. "Said her brother Tyler would fix it." That name made my skin crawl. Tyler was the kind of man who smiled too easily and asked too many questions about money. But I never imagined this. "So they tied you up?" I asked. Caleb shook his head slowly. "Not just that." His voice dropped lower. "They were supposed to make it look like I disappeared." My chest went cold. "What?" "They told me the company debts would fall on you," Caleb said. "Since you co-signed the startup loans." I felt like the ground shifted beneath my feet. This wasn't just betrayal. It was financial murder. They planned to ruin us both. Caleb leaned forward, gripping my arm. They're inside the house right now, Dad. Melissa thinks you stayed home like I told you. Through the shed window, I could see the back door of the house. The lights were on, and silhouettes moved inside. Melissa, Tyler, celebrating Thanksgiving, while Caleb sat tied up like a hostage. Something inside me hardened in that moment, because betrayal hurts, but calculated betrayal. That creates something far more dangerous. Caleb looked at me, his voice trembling. What are we going to do? I stared at the house for a long moment. Then I said quietly, we're not calling the police. Caleb blinked. Why not? Because in that moment, a different idea had already begun forming in my mind. A slow, careful plan. The kind of plan that ruins people the same way they tried to ruin you. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it waits. And I had just realized something important. Melissa and Tyler thought they had already won. They had no idea the real game was just beginning. The most dangerous revenge isn't rage. It's patience. I stood in the dim light of that shed, staring at the house where Melissa and her brother were casually celebrating Thanksgiving, while the man they planned to destroy sat bruised and tied up behind them. And suddenly something inside me went very still. Caleb expected panic, maybe anger. But what he saw on my face instead was something else. Calculation. Dad, why aren't we calling the police? He asked again. I looked at him carefully before answering. Because if we do, I said quietly, they'll deny everything. Caleb frowned.
They tied me up.
Yes, I said. But by the time police arrive, they'll say you had a fight, that you stormed off, that you made it up. I pointed toward the house. And Melissa controls your company accounts. She can move the money before anyone even starts investigating. Caleb's shoulders slumped slightly. He knew I was right. Melissa had spent months quietly positioning herself as the financial gatekeeper of his business. And Tyler. Tyler was exactly the kind of man who knew how to disappear when things got dangerous. Then what do we do? Caleb asked. I leaned back against the wooden wall of the shed and folded my arms. First, I said calmly, you go back inside. His eyes widened. What? You walk in that house? I continued, and act like nothing happened.
That's insane, he said.
No, I replied. It's strategy. Caleb stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Most people knew me as a quiet, retired accountant, a widower who spent his mornings gardening and his afternoons reading the newspaper. But before retirement, I spent 30 years auditing fraud cases. I made my living exposing people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. And Melissa, she had made a very serious mistake. She assumed I was old, not dangerous. You're going to thank Melissa for hosting Thanksgiving, I said. Caleb blinked in disbelief. And Tyler, he asked. You'll shake his hand.
That's crazy.
No, I said again. What's crazy is letting them know we're onto them. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. They literally tied me to a chair, Dad. I nodded slowly. Yes, and that, I said, my voice colder now, means they're desperate. I stepped closer to him. Desperate people make mistakes. He hesitated. But what if they try something again? I looked directly toward the house. Then we'll make sure they regret it. Because while Caleb was trapped in this shed, I had already noticed something interesting when I walked through the backyard earlier. Melissa's SUV was parked in the driveway, but Tyler's truck, it wasn't there, which meant one thing. Tyler had arrived earlier and left, which meant whatever they were planning next, it hadn't happened yet. Caleb swallowed. You really think we can beat them? I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. They think they're criminals, I said. But they've never met a professional who hunts them. Because the biggest mistake people like Melissa make is assuming the story ends when the victim finds out. But in reality, that's when the real game begins. And by the time they realized what I was doing, it would already be too late. The worst trap a liar can fall into is believing their own story. By the time Caleb and I walked toward the house, the sun had already begun to set. The sky burned orange behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like walking into enemy territory. Remember, I said quietly, stopping Caleb just before we reached the back door. You were never in that shed. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. And Melissa, he asked, smile. That was the hardest part. Caleb nodded, then pushed open the door. Warm air and the smell of roasted turkey filled the kitchen. The dining table was perfectly set, plates, candles, even the pumpkin pie Caleb loved sitting in the center. Melissa stood by the stove, her back to us. When she turned around and saw Caleb, her face froze for half a second.
Just half a second, but that was a Caleb,
She said quickly, forcing a smile. I thought you were working upstairs. Her eyes shifted toward me. And Mr. Turner, I didn't know you were coming today. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. Caleb walked past her calmly. Plans changed, he said. She studied him carefully, probably searching for signs that he knew. But Caleb had always been a good actor. He kissed her on the cheek like nothing had happened. Smells great, he said. For a moment, Melissa looked confused, then relieved. She believed the lie. I stepped inside and hung my coat on the chair. You did a lot of work here, I said politely. Melissa laughed lightly. Well, it's Thanksgiving. She poured a glass of wine and handed it to me. Families should be together today. The irony was almost impressive. We sat at the table. 3 people eating dinner, 2 pretending nothing was wrong, and 1 pretending she hadn't just kidnapped her boyfriend hours earlier. Melissa kept talking about the food, about the weather, about meaningless things. But I watched her. Every movement, every glance. And I noticed something interesting. She kept checking her phone over and over, waiting for someone. Tyler. After about 20 minutes, her phone finally buzzed. She looked down quickly, then stood up. Excuse me, she said. I need to take this. She walked into the hallway. The moment she was out of sight, Caleb leaned toward me. Dad, she's messaging Tyler. I know. What if he comes back? I took another sip of wine. That's exactly what we want. Caleb frowned. Why? Because Tyler was the missing piece. The man who turned Melissa's fraud into a full criminal operation. And criminals always get careless when they think the plan is working. Footsteps returned. Melissa sat down again, smiling even wider now. Tyler might stop by later, she said casually. He wanted to wish us happy Thanksgiving. Caleb nodded politely. Sounds good. But inside, I felt something shift, because Melissa didn't realize one thing. When Tyler arrived tonight, I would finally meet the man who tried to destroy my son. And when predators walk into the wrong house, sometimes they don't realize they're no longer hunting. They're the ones being studied. Because revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with patience. And patience was something I had mastered long ago. The most dangerous trap is the one that looks like an invitation. The knock on the front door came just after 7. 3 slow taps. Confident, like the man outside believed he owned the place. Melissa's eyes lit up the moment she heard it. That must be Tyler, she said, standing quickly. Her voice carried a strange excitement, the kind people get when a plan is going exactly the way they hoped. Caleb kept eating quietly. I watched everything. Melissa opened the door, and there he was, Tyler Grayson, tall, broad shoulders, expensive leather jacket, the kind of smile that looked friendly, but never reached his eyes. Happy Thanksgiving, he said as he stepped inside. His gaze landed on Caleb. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face. It disappeared almost instantly, but I saw it, because Tyler expected Caleb to still be tied to that chair. Melissa noticed it too, and in that brief silent moment between them, they both understood something had gone wrong. But neither of them knew what. Tyler recovered quickly. Well, look at that, he said with a casual laugh. Everyone's here. Melissa forced a smile. Yeah, Caleb finished work earlier than expected. Tyler studied Caleb a little longer. Caleb met his eyes calmly. Then Tyler turned toward me. And you must be Mr. Turner. I stood up slowly and offered my hand. Daniel Turner. Tyler shook it. His grip was firm. Testing. Melissa's told me a lot about you, he said. I'm sure she has. I replied evenly. We sat back down at the table. Now it was 4 people. 4 plates. 4 quiet minds calculating different things. Tyler poured himself a drink and leaned back in his chair. So Caleb, he said casually, how's the company doing? There it was. The real reason he came. Caleb shrugged. Bussy. Tyler smiled. I heard you were dealing with some financial stress. Melissa glanced at him quickly. He wasn't supposed to say that yet. Caleb stayed calm. Every startup has stress. Tyler nodded slowly. True. But debts can pile up. Then he looked at me. And when family signs loans, things get messy. The message was clear. They thought they still had the power. That Caleb would disappear soon, and I'd be left with the financial wreckage. But Tyler had no idea I already knew the entire scheme. So I leaned forward slightly and asked the one question he didn't expect. Tyler, I said calmly, what do you know about offshore transfers? The room went silent. Tyler blinked. Melissa froze. Caleb looked down at his plate, hiding the small smile forming on his face. Tyler laughed awkwardly. Offshore transfers, that's random.
Not really.
I said. Then I reached into my coat pocket and placed something on the table. A printed bank statement. Melissa's color drained instantly, because the account number on that page belonged to the shell company she had been secretly moving Caleb's money into. Tyler leaned forward slowly. His confident smile faded. How did you get that? He asked quietly. I met his eyes. And for the first time that evening, Tyler realized something important. He hadn't walked into a Thanksgiving dinner. He had walked into an investigation. And the man sitting across from him had been watching criminals like him for 30 years. People who build traps for others often forget one thing. Sometimes the person they target already knows how the trap works. For the first time that night, the room felt truly quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a family dinner, but the heavy kind, the kind that comes when lies begin collapsing. Tyler stared at the bank statement on the table like it had suddenly grown teeth. Melissa hadn't moved. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. Too tight. You still haven't answered my question, I said calmly. Tyler leaned back in his chair and forced a chuckle. Miss Dredd, Turner, people move money around all the time. That doesn't mean anything. That's true, I agreed. Then I slid another paper across the table. This one might mean something. Caleb watched silently as Tyler picked it up, his eyebrows pulled together. What is this? A transaction log, I said. 3 months of transfers from Caleb's company account to a consulting firm called North River Solutions. Melissa's breathing grew shallow, because North River Solutions didn't exist. It was one of the shell companies she had created. Tyler looked at her quickly. She avoided his eyes. Interesting. Very interesting. You're accusing Melissa of stealing? Tyler asked. I shook my head slowly. No, both of them blinked. I'm saying she already did. Melissa slammed her glass on the table.
That's ridiculous,
she snapped. Her mask was slipping now. Caleb gave me access to manage the finances. Caleb finally spoke. Yes, he said quietly. To manage them, not empty them. Melissa turned toward him sharply.
Your business was drowning. I was fixing it.
By sending money to fake companies, Caleb asked. Her mouth opened. No answer came out. Tyler leaned forward now, his voice colder. Let's slow down here, he said. Even if money moved around, there's no proof Melissa personally took it. I smiled slightly. That was the moment I had been waiting for. You're right, I said. Then I reached into my coat again and placed a small black device on the table. A USB drive. Tyler frowned. And what's that? A backup. Melissa's face went completely pale, because she recognized it immediately. It was the same flash drive she used for accounting backups. The one she thought she deleted earlier that day. What's on it? Tyler asked cautiously. I folded my hands together. Every financial record Melissa erased this morning. Caleb looked at me in surprise. You recovered them. I nodded. She forgot one important thing about accountants. Tyler didn't speak now. Neither did Melissa. The weight of the evidence had finally landed. But the real damage wasn't just the stolen money. It was the kidnapping. The moment Caleb had been tied to that chair. And Tyler knew it. Because his next words came out slower. Even if you had proof of fraud, he said carefully, that still doesn't explain why Caleb was in that shed. Melissa's head snapped toward him. Too late. The room went silent again, because Tyler had just confirmed something without realizing it. He knew about the shed. I leaned back in my chair and looked directly at him. Interesting, I said softly. Tyler's eyes widened slightly. Melissa whispered under her breath, Tyler. But the damage was already done. Sometimes criminals lose because of evidence, but more often, they lose because they talk too much. And Tyler had just walked straight into the biggest mistake of the night. The truth doesn't always need to be discovered. Sometimes it reveals itself when liars panic. The second the word shed left Tyler's mouth, the room froze. Melissa looked at him like he had just detonated a bomb. Tyler realized it too late. His jaw tightened, and he leaned back slowly, trying to recover. But the damage was already done. Caleb spoke first, quiet, controlled. Funny, he said, looking straight at Tyler. I never mentioned a shed tonight. Melissa's breathing grew louder. Tyler forced a laugh. Come on, it was just a guess. I tilted my head slightly. A very specific guess. No one moved. Then Melissa suddenly pushed her chair back. This is insane, she snapped. You're both twisting things. She turned toward Caleb. You're seriously believing this? After everything I've done for you. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. The hurt in his eyes was real. You tied me to a chair, Melissa. Her lips parted. For a brief second, guilt flashed across her face. But people like Melissa don't stay guilty for long. They switch to anger.
You forced my hand, she shouted.
You were going to ruin everything. Tyler stood up quickly. Melissa. But she was already unraveling.
You don't understand,
She continued, pointing at Caleb.
the business was failing. The loans were crushing us. I had to move the money.
Caleb's voice stayed calm. So your solution was kidnapping me. She hesitated. That pause said everything. Tyler stepped in again, trying to regain control. Look, he said firmly. Things got out of hand. But nobody got hurt. I stood up slowly. Nobody. Tyler's eyes met mine. There was a new tension there now. The confidence he walked in with was gone. You tried to make my son disappear, I said quietly, and leave me with the debt. Tyler didn't answer. Because he knew I was right. Melissa crossed her arms defensively. You can't prove any of that. I looked at her carefully. Then I reached into my coat pocket one last time and placed my phone on the table. The screen was glowing. A small red icon blinked at the top. Recording. Melissa's eyes widened. Tyler went completely still. Everything you've said for the last 20 minutes, I explained calmly, has been recorded. Silence crashed over the room. Melissa's voice trembled now. You can't use that. I raised an eyebrow. Why not? Tyler ran a hand over his face. For the first time all night, he looked nervous, real nervous, because the fraud was bad. But kidnapping, conspiracy, extortion, that could destroy their lives. Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper. Daniel, please. The fake sweetness was gone now. All that remained was fear. But I felt none of the satisfaction she expected, only something colder. Because revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about forcing people to face the truth they tried to bury. I picked up my phone, and that's when Tyler asked the one question that changed everything. Wait, he said slowly. You haven't called the police yet, have you? I looked at him and smiled, because that question meant something important. Tyler finally understood what was happening. This wasn't just exposure. It was a choice, and the decision I made next would determine exactly how their lives collapsed. Power shifts the moment the victim stops reacting and starts deciding. Tyler's question hung in the air. You haven't called the police yet, have you? The fear in his voice was subtle, but it was there. And that was the moment I realized something important. For the first time that night, Tyler understood he wasn't in control anymore. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. No, I said calmly. I haven't. Melissa let out a shaky breath. Tyler's shoulders relaxed slightly. They both thought that meant mercy. It didn't. Caleb looked at me, confused. Dad, I turned to him. Do you remember what your mother used to say about trust? He nodded slowly. She said trust is the most valuable thing you can give someone. Exactly, I said. Then I looked back at Melissa. And you treated it like spare change. Her eyes filled with panic now. Daniel, please. We can fix this. Tyler nodded quickly. We can return the money. All of it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. People like them always believe everything has a price, but they misunderstood something. This was never about the money. You tried to destroy my son, I said quietly. Melissa shook her head desperately.
I panicked.
I didn't think it would go this far. Caleb finally stood up. The pain in his face was deeper than anger. You tied me up like I was nothing, he said. She didn't respond, because there was no defense left. I picked up my phone again. Tyler watched carefully. So what happens now? He asked. I met his eyes. No, the truth does, and I pressed a button on the screen. A call connected instantly. Tyler's face drained of color, because he heard the voice on the other end. Miss Sitter. Turner. The officer said through the speaker. We're still outside? Melissa's head snapped toward the window. Blue and red lights flashed across the yard. Tyler whispered under his breath. You set us up. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. You set yourselves up. The officers knocked on the door moments later. Within minutes, Melissa and Tyler were sitting in the living room with handcuffs around their wrists. Their perfect plan had collapsed in less than an hour. As the police led them outside, Melissa looked back at Caleb. Her voice cracked. I loved you. Caleb didn't answer, because sometimes silence is the only response betrayal deserves. Later that night, Caleb and I sat alone at the table. The turkey was cold. The candles had burned down, But something felt lighter. Thanks for coming today, Caleb said quietly. I nodded. Sometimes showing up saves everything, because betrayal may break trust, but it also reveals who people really are. And once you see the truth, you never let those people control your life again. If this story meant something to you, consider liking the video. And tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if you believe that quiet strength can be more powerful than anger, subscribe to Silent Revenge for more stories where the truth always finds its way back.